Okay, good evening, all guests, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to SOAS. We're really honored to have amongst us today the founder and chair of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, Sir Mo Ibrahim, and his wife, Lady Jane Ibrahim, our Tanzania High Commissioner, Mbelwa Kairuki, Tanzania Minister for Health, Madam Justina Mhagama, Secretary General of CCM Tanzania, Dr. Emmanuel Nchimbi, CEO of Tanzania Commercial Bank, Adam Mihayo, and our very own Provost and Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Joanna Newman, SOAS Deputy Vice Chancellor and COO, Kadir Meir, Madam Maryam Salim, Country Director of the World Bank in Ethiopia, Sudan, South Sudan, and Eritrea, members of the media, the BBC, I believe, are here, the SOAS community, members of the public, Karibuni. Apologies, I couldn't mention everybody, but Karibuni sana. So my name is Ida Hajivayanis, and I'm senior lecturer here at SOAS. But I'm here in my capacity as chair for Center of African Studies. I'm really pleased to welcome you all on behalf of the Center of African Studies and the Center of Pan-African Studies, which is chaired by Dr. Daniel Mulugeta, for the launch of the lecture series in particular, that we're really happy that we're really happy that many colleagues are here. So this is quite personal for me because Dr. Salim Ahmed Salim was a household name in the town of Morogoro, where I grew up. He was Prime Minister when I was around 9 years old. And it was a time in our politics when politicians stayed in position for a long time. So we learned their names at school. We had songs that we sang in their praise. And I particularly remember one that we sang during our Mchaka Mchaka, which is the morning run. But I can't sing it now because my voice is now gone. He is also of Zanzibari heritage. And so I believe that people from Unguja and Pemba, which is where I'm from, are very proud of his journey, especially as one of the youngest political activists on the continent, who then later held positions in the UN and the OAU. It is also very exciting for me to see that SOAS is now taking steps to engage deeply with a voice from the continent. We're also in a privileged position, I believe, all of us here, to understand the journey of the celebrated Pan-Africanist who has worked in domestic and international African politics, shaping our history. I believe we can take inspiration and learn a great deal from Dr. Salim, especially his illustrious career, his stance in advocating for decolonization of the continent, African mechanism for conflict and prevention, management and resolution, and also election and democratization. So today's talk, I believe, focuses from 1989 to 2001, when Dr. Salim was Secretary General of the OAU, the precursor to the African Union. The African Union has its 38th summit in February of next year. And we'll be electing for some key positions. So I look forward today to hearing what the panelists' reflections are, and also their thoughts, all of you thoughts on today's topic. Unfortunately, two of the speakers could not join us today, Mr. Abdul Mohammed and Mr. Wane. We shall miss them, but I'm really pleased to see in attendance here, physically and online, people who have worked and have been influenced by Salim Ahmed, including Ahmed Salim, his son, his youngest son, who's worked closely with SOAS, and also Omar Ilyas, who has worked closely with Salim Ahmed Salim. I hope all of you and them will engage with today. Before I go, I have to thank a few colleagues who've worked tirelessly to bring today together. I have to thank my colleague, Daniel Mulugeta, Megan Thompson, Sunil Poon, and also Ahmed Salim and Sarah Majengo. They've all been instrumental in making today happen. Lastly, in terms of logistics, should anything happen like a fire alarm, we all go out that way or that way and meet outside, but nothing should happen. Okay, so I will welcome my COO, Chief Operating Officer Kadir Meir, to give some words from SOAS. Thank you.
Thank you, Ida. I think Ida's said it all, so I won't speak for too long. And thankfully, she also named all of our distinguished guests, so I won't repeat them. But welcome to our distinguished guests, ministers, ambassadors, and significant colleagues. Hello, and a very warm welcome from myself. My name is Garda Mir. I'm the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Finance and Operations here, and the clerk to the board, alongside my executive colleague, Professor Joanna Newman. So a huge and warm welcome to all of you. Here at SOAS, our mission is to challenge perspectives and empower our students to question the global status quo and to find solutions to issues facing the world today. We aim to unite a diverse spectrum of backgrounds and talents to produce meaningful change. Our programs are taught by respected international academics who are engaged in fieldwork and research that influences government, industries, and communities across the world. The Centre of African Studies has a long history as a leading centre for the study of Africa and its diasporas in the UK. It provides a focus for the study of Africa across the university, and its vibrant programme of lectures, seminars, performances, conferences, research initiatives, and many other activities. We're delighted to host the launch of the Salim Ahmed Salim lecture series, which takes inspiration from the Salim Ahmed Salim online archive, a digital repository of Salim Ahmed's diplomatic and Pan-African contributions, which is a crucial resource for researchers, policymakers, and future generations, preserving his rich legacy and offering insights into the historical and contemporary dynamics of African diplomacy. SOAS President Zainab Badawi has the privilege of personally knowing Salim Ahmed Salim and noted that she is delighted that his contribution to the advancement of Africans, both on the continent and abroad, will continue through this partnership with SOAS. I am honoured to be present at this event that serves as a tribute to a distinguished leader, and look forward to hearing the panel's reflections on the evolving role of the African Union in a rapidly transforming global order, some of which we only saw over the weekend. SOAS is well placed to play an important role in working with African institutions as we support nations looking at redefining their role in this shifting global landscape. So thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Kadir. Thank you. And I now welcome the ambassador for Tanzania, Mheshimiwa Mbelwa Kairuki.
Professor Joanna Newman, Provost and Deputy Vice Chancellor, Mr. Kadir, Deputy Vice Chancellor, distinguished leaders from Tanzania, we are privileged here to have in our midst the Secretary General of the ruling party, CCM, of which Dr. Salim has been a member of the Central Committee for many years. Honorable Minister for Health, Janice Mhagama, Mr. Mo Ibrahim, my dear sister Maryam, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is with great humility that I stand before you this evening to start off what promises to be an interesting discussion on Africa in a changing world and the role of the African Union. It is perhaps even a more humbling experience as this discussion will focus upon and commemorate the legacy of a proud son of Africa and Tanzanian, Dr. Salim Ahmed Salim. Allow me to express my deep appreciation to SOAS for agreeing to host this discussion today, and furthermore for their commitment towards hosting on annual basis a series of lectures on Dr. Salim. These lectures, I've been informed, are aiming to keeping alive the records of his deeds and services in his 60 years long career, as well as affording the future generations access to exemplary and invaluable political leadership and diplomatic knowledge that remains relevant even today. Special appreciation goes out to Maryam Salim, the daughter of Dr. Salim, and head of the archives and the country director of the World Bank for working tirelessly to bring this event together to share the legacy of Dr. Salim Ahmed Salim with this world. Special thanks also goes to Ahmed Salim, who is not with us physically, but I'm sure is following this session online. It would be remiss of me were I not to appreciate the time and commitment that has been made by the people here at SOAS. We thank you for organizing this event to honor our leader. Your time and commitment towards the discussion of this Africa's future is acknowledged and much appreciated. It is quite a fortuitous coincidence that as we launch what we believe is going to become a standing tradition of annual lectures, an event on Salim Ahmed Salim here at SOAS, we are likewise celebrating the anniversary of independence of Tanzania mainland that took place 63 years ago on this day. There's no greater tribute to a country than to celebrate its age by honoring the impact that one of its sons and people have had the African continent and indeed the world. In recognition of his contribution to diplomacy, both at home and globally, Her Excellency Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan, President of Tanzania, presided over and officiated the launch of Dr. Salim Ahmed Salim Digital Archives last October in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Her Excellency likewise redesignated the Diplomatic Training Institute of Tanzania in his honor by calling it Salim Ahmed Salim Center for Foreign Relations, both in recognition of his contribution to the field as much as to provide a role model and benchmark of performance to aspire to those who shall study at the center. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the task that I have been given this evening is not an easy one. I've been asked to introduce a great man, a father, a man of great humility and candor, and consummate diplomat, a formidable and meticulous politician, a great leader and Pan-Africanist. Born and raised in Zanzibar, Dr. Salim Ahmed Salim held many positions during his career, both within Tanzania and on international arena. He was considered a man of many talents, what we refer to in modern parlance as jack of all trades. What sets him apart, however, from other men of many talents is the dedication and excellence that he brought to every task and every profession that he undertook. I'm sure you will hear of his role as a freedom fighter and a champion for the liberation and independence from colonization of countless countries. Beginning with his efforts to bring about independence in Zanzibar, this fire and fervor stayed with him throughout his career and his efforts to see the decolonization and liberation of all African countries from both overt as well as from far more covert and subtle forms of oppression like apartheid and neocolonialism are legendary. You will likewise hear of his diplomatic career that took off at the age of 22. Many of us at this age, we usually either late secondary school or primary school or university, still trying to figure out what measures to take and dreaming of what the future might hold. Despite his young age, Dr. Salim's career in his diplomacy was marked by sound judgment and a maturity that belied these years. His role as the permanent representative of Tanzania at the UN saw his continued campaign for liberation of colonized states both in Africa and internationally. Also catapulted him into what would become an indivisible part of his repertoire as a mediator and peace advocate. His unprecedented championing for an ultimate success in reinstating China's seat at the United Nations in 1971 further cemented his role as a consummate and seasoned diplomat. Indeed, Dr. Salim holds the honor of being one of the few Africans who have been awarded China's highest state honor, the Friendship Medal, in 2019. I was honored to be the ambassador of Tanzania in China during that time, and I joined Maryam to an event which he was honored by the Chinese government. It was a proud and humbling moment, and further cemented the strong relations between Tanzania and China. It is perhaps his assumption of the post of Secretary General of OAU that would later become the African Union, and his invaluable role that you will hear most about this evening. As the 7th Secretary General of OAU, Dr. Salim assumed his office at a time when the illusion and the afterglow of independence was fading from members of the OAU. It was a time when the harsh reality of dwindling financial resources, limited social services, non-existent infrastructure, unqualified personnel, and deeply rooted regional and linguistic divisions that were prone to foster angst and internal strife were settling in. The OAU in itself was at the time perceived as incompetent and toothless, deemed to be more of a meeting club for heads of states rather than a transformative and unified decision-making body. Sovereignty and paranoid protectionism of states were the order of the day, and the cooperation and team building that were sorely needed for OAU to succeed were sadly lacking. Wars and internal conflicts were rampant, and one-man show were the order of the day, and inclusiveness of non-state actors in the decision-making process was considered anathema. As Secretary General, Dr. Salim worked tirelessly to nurture and bring together a cohesive and inclusive working culture between members of OAU, paving the way for a more inclusive, better functioning organization. He likewise worked towards building a culture of economic integration as a countermeasure to the principles of sovereign rights and invaluable of nations. A staunch believer in the need for regional economic integration, Dr. Salim played a pivotal role in strengthening the African Union by laying the groundwork for a more inclusive, people-centric, and collaborative instruments. This over time transcended successfully into African Union, and today is working towards achieving even greater integration through its ongoing plans for a common trade area, a common market, and a common currency. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the legacy of Salim Ahmed Salim, and it is this legacy that will be under discussion by our venerable panelists this evening. They will revisit his role in building up the OAU, examine the relevance of policies and decisions that he made that still resonate through time, and examine relevance of his leadership style and conviction in present-day AU. In this context of present-day, evolving geopolitical relations where Africa stands at the cusp of finally having the will with her to revise the tide of development in its favor, such a discussion is not only prudent, but timely. New transnational global concerns that require collective redress to include crimes, diseases, and common challenges like global warming and its effects impel the discussion with a sense of urgency. Does the AU have these issues at the core of its agenda? Is it equipped to leverage our comparative advantage in key areas for a greater good? Have our persistent challenge of conflict, divisiveness, and non-interference found a panacea? What next for Africa? I look forward to hearing and learning where African Union is going, as our panelist holds what I believe will be a robust, frank, and enlightening discussion. With these many words, I thank you, and I'm ready to listen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Asante sana Balozi. That was brilliant. Thank you very much. Can I now welcome Miss Maryam Salim, to the first daughter of Salim Ahmed Salim, who is here to represent the Salim Ahmed Salim Archive.
Ambassador, you covered a lot of ground I wanted to, but we'll continue. Good evening and welcome, distinguished professors, esteemed panelists, students and members of the SOAS community, invited guests, my fellow Tanzanians, those of you connecting online, particularly my friends and my family, most especially my family. Thank you for being here. It is a pleasure to be here on behalf of my father, Dr. Salim, and our family as we kick off this lecture series in partnership with SOAS Center for African Studies and SOAS Center for Pan-African Studies. While I'm here as a family representative, it is my brother Ahmed who championed the curation of the Salim Ahmed Salim Digital Archives, which is essentially a glimpse into pivotal historical moments through our father's rich collection of personal notes, interviews, speeches, press clippings, and photos. A considerable amount of work that was undertaken to scan all of these various documents. For years, we, his children, his friends, and colleagues, my friends, kept asking my father to write his memoirs, to which he would respond, "I will, when I'm ready." Several of my friends even bought him voice recorders to help document the memoirs. Eventually, he did begin the journey of telling his story. A few draft chapters were written, but unfortunately, he was unable to complete the book, which makes these archives even more important for us to share with the world. My father kept meticulous notes of everything, from detailed notes of phone conversations he held with my brother Ali and I, to boarding passes for trips across the world. And I'm grateful that we now benefit from his disciplined practice of documenting behind-the-scenes conversations that offer a unique lens on the decisions and events that influenced modern history and shaped our world. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to share a brief overview of the digital archives, activities which we launched in October 2023. At the outset, I would like to extend our deepest gratitude to the government of Tanzania and Her Excellency President Samia Suluhu Hassan for their support in launching the Salim Ahmed Salim Digital Archives. And as Ambassador Kariuki already noted, President Samia honored my father's legacy as a diplomatic giant by renaming the Center for Foreign Relations in Dar es Salaam to the Salim Ahmed Salim Center for Foreign Relations. As a niche platform, the archive continues to attract new audiences and has attracted nearly 20,000 new users. We are active on X and Instagram and have achieved a global footprint with visitors from the United States, Europe, and across other African countries. Over the last year, the archives have also hosted dialogues in partnership with the Ngozi Institute, a leadership program in Tanzania, and Columbia University through the Global Centers in Nairobi, and now through SOAS. This partnership with SOAS is significant in today's theme, which explores Africa and a changing world. It is an opportunity for history to inform continental progress by examining the role of the African Union to foster space where ideas can be challenged and redefined. It is fitting that this first lecture examines the role of the AU within the context of the current challenges facing the African continent. What many of you might not know is that my father was present during the OU summit, the first OU summit, and also the last when it transitioned to the AU. A few days after my father presented his credentials to President Nasser in 1964, the first ordinary assembly of heads of state and government of the Organization of African Unity took place. Bear in mind, he was only 22. And on the occasion of the last summit of the OEU in July 2001, where they launched the AU, my father stated, "From Sirte to Lusaka, we have strived to meet the expectations of this assembly and to lay the foundation for the transformation of the OEU to the African Union. The presence of so many heads of state and government during the debate on the African Union provides me with a good opportunity before your departure from Lusaka to thank all of you once again for the confidence that you had reposed to me in the period of the last 12 years, which I have the singular honor and privilege to serve as a Secretary General of our continental organization." He served an unprecedented 3 terms as OAU Secretary General. Now, more than 2 decades later, I've returned to Ethiopia. And the first greeting I received as I set foot in Addis for my new assignment was, "Welcome home." Over the years, our family has heard from so many who have admired him and who have been influenced by him. And now let me offer a story that illustrates just how small and interconnected our world truly is. Just before I moved to Addis from Phnom Penh, I had a briefing with my soon-to-be senior economist. And before we could even get started on our conversation about Ethiopia, he told me with much excitement that he'd interacted with my father on 2 memorable occasions. The first time in high school, he had a term assignment to profile someone who represented a new generation of Pan-Africanists, and he selected my dad to profile. He was determined to contact him, and when he finally managed to get in touch, my father immediately offered to speak with him. Their conversation lasted over an hour, and to say my colleague was thrilled would be an understatement. In 2009, when my colleague was an Overseas Development Institute fellow in Zambia, he traveled with his minister, Dr Salim, for a conference where my father was also present. My father was elated that my new colleague had continued to do something more in his life than a connection to Africa. He gave him a big pat on his back and said, "Come, have lunch with me. I need a familiar friend to survive all these economists." I have heard varying versions of such stories. Then again, growing up, I was a captive audience, pleading with him to recount his experience as a journalist. In case you didn't know, he was a journalist at one point in his life, or his travels to Cuba and China. In fact, my father traveled to many more countries around the world before even setting foot on mainland Tanganyika. I wanted to learn more about his meetings with various leaders and revolutionaries, and the time our mother cooked dinner for Che Guevara. Any friend I brought home would also be enthralled by the many history lessons, for it was just that, a glimpse into an exciting time in history. The archives now offers that very same glimpse to a broader audience. Ladies and gentlemen, the collaboration with SOAS through the Salim Ahmed Salim lecture series is exemplary of the purpose behind the archives, to promote dialogue and on the complexities facing our world, and particularly the African continent. The archives content is a lens into historical themes that are still relevant today. Conversations such as the one we are having today ensure that we continue to shape our own narrative as active leaders championing progress in Africa. Through the leadership journey of Dr. Salim and many world leaders of his time, we have a unique perspective of leadership dynamics in navigating conflict and challenges. To put it plainly, the stories and narratives about key events from our past are straight from the source. The archives was curated to be more than just a repository of memories showcasing pivotal moments in history. It serves as a source of inspiration, offering valuable lessons to guide and shape future leaders navigating an increasingly complex global landscape. It should remind us of the central role we, as Africans, have played in history. Take, for example, as Ambassador Kariuki noted, the critical role that several African nations, including Tanzania, played in restoring China's place in the United Nations in 1971. How does one explain or try to rationalize the continued absence of the Chinese nation from the United Nations? These were the words of my father whenever he discussed and tell us of the events that surrounded the restoration of the People's Republic of China as the permanent representative to the UN. Now, did my father dance at that historic decision on the admission of China? If you ask the American delegation, the US media, including the New York Times, he did dance. If you ask the Chinese people, he danced. In an interview in Esquire magazine in April 1972, my father said, "If we want to dance, it's our affair. We're in nobody's client state. Our freedom is not for sale. We just didn't happen to be dancing when they said we were dancing." To learn more, read the archives, check out the archives, and you decide whether he danced or not. Now, let me conclude by saying that this gathering today includes stakeholders from academia, private and public sectors. Together, we have an opportunity to engage and reflect on the leadership we need and the role each of us can play in shaping our future. we have to think about ourselves as more than just individuals in a specific role. We need to look at the lessons of my father and other statesmen of his time that went beyond their specific role. They looked at themselves as the champions of their countries, of their people, of the continent, of other people. You look at the non-aligned movements they were all engaged in. So it was not just about us, it was about the world. And given the challenges we continue to face, not only in Africa, but in the rest of the globe, we really do need to be championing more than just our individual selves. And that's what we can hope for in our existing leadership, but also on future leaders, all of you that are thinking of taking on role in that sphere. Lastly, I'd like to thank the respective teams at SOAS Center of African Studies and SOAS Center for Pan-African Studies. Our heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Ida and your team to facilitating this lecture series that will inspire us to take action in our respective spheres of influence. Special thanks as well to Adam Habib, the Vice Chancellor of SOAS, and of course, Zainab Bidawi, the President of SOAS, was our entry point in introducing the archives to SOAS. And thank you all today for listening and being part of this discussion.
Thank you very much, Maryam. So now we'll all have to go check if he danced or not. Can I welcome my colleague, Dr. Daniel Mulugeta, will be moderating the panel. And let me take this chance to also invite Sir Ibrahim to please come up, and also Professor Funmi Olonisakin. I hope I said that all right. The whole time I was like, is there a sound I'm missing? But if there is, I'm really sorry.
Good evening. My name is Daniel Mulugeta. I'm a lecturer in African politics, as well as the chair for the Center of Pan-African Studies here at SOAS. It's both an honor and privilege to welcome you all to this important and timely discussion tonight. We are delighted to have such an esteemed Pan-Africans here. Let me begin by briefly introducing panelists. We have next to me Professor Funmi Olonisakin. I hope I've said it right. Who is the Vice President for International Engagement and Service at King's College London. She's also the Professor of Security, Leadership and Development and the founder and former Director of the African Leadership Center at King's College. And we have Sir Ibrahim, who is the founder and chair of the Ibrahim Foundation, which he established in 2006 to support good governance and exceptional leadership on the African continent. And Ms. Maryam Salim, who is the World Bank Country Director for Eritrea, Ethiopia, South Sudan, and Sudan. She is the eldest daughter of Dr. Salim Ahmed Salim. She's now here with us to represent the Salim Ahmed Salim archives. As Ida said, unfortunately, two of our panelists were unable to join us because of unforeseen circumstances. So, our objective is laid out already by Ida and Maryam. I wouldn't say a lot, but a few words. We are here today to honor the extraordinary leadership of Dr. Salim Ahmed Salim and relaunch the Dr. Salim online archives dedicated to preserving his remarkable legacy. But we are also here to take the opportunity to reflect on the role of leadership in contemporary Africa in addressing the continent's contemporary pressing challenge. This is really especially a critical moment as the African Union prepares to elect a new chairperson in February next year. So in light of this, I would like to open the discussion by inviting our panelists to share their reflections on Dr. Salim's leadership. I would like to start with Sir Ibrahim. So Dr. Salim played an active role in the Ibrahim Foundation. He served as a member of the board, and later he was the chair of the Ibrahim Prize for Achievement in Africa Leadership between 2011 and 2019. So how would you reflect on his leadership, and how would you reflect on your relationship, particularly with with Dr. Salim.
Dr. Salim is, for me, I'm sorry. Thanks. For me, Dr. Salim is a mentor, an advisor, and a very close friend. Many people don't realize, actually, that Salim was a vice chairman for Celtel immediately after he came from the OEU. When he finished, I asked him to join us and say, we're just starting Celtel, the mobile company in Africa. And it was a great conversation. I remember we were at the Amstel Hotel in Amsterdam. We had dinner and then we started to talk. And he said, look, I mean, I spent all my life in governments, UN, and I really get worried about all this business stuff, business. And I tell him, look, Salim, we're doing something different here. And actually, we're bringing you or asking you to join us because we creating whistleblowers, policemen within the port. And you and at that time, Lord Pryor. I don't think you are all young. You don't know who is Lord Pryor. He's a great man. And we'll give you a whistle, this whistle. If anything of the company wrong, just blow your whistle. That's your job here. Because he said, look, I'm not a businessman. Why you guys want me? I said, look, just look at what we're doing, and we don't bear bribes. We don't do this. We don't do that. How we do? We pay our taxes, and many companies in Africa don't. And you'll see, you'll be there. And of course, became history. We built the company, and Salim traveled around our operation and stuff like that. And of course, it changed people's lives. Mobile phones. Africa was not connected. We just connected Africa. And we created a huge number of jobs. And so I looked back to Salim and said, now, tell me, Salim, what do you think of this? He said, I could not believe this. How can in business really change, do all this? And I told him, look, you guys in government to spend all this time shouting and going to the Addis and coming from Addis, and what you have done to Africa, But by investing and building infrastructure in Africa, we change Africa. He loved the company, of course. And then we decided, while we're still at the company, we said, look, I think it seems we're going to make money here. This company is going to make money. What about if we use all this money to put it back in the foundation for governance? And that's how the foundation was. He was a founding member of the foundation, actually. And he also founding member of the prize committee, which is separate from the board. Kofi Annan was the chair of the prize committee for 5 years. Then Salim became the chairman of the prize committee for the rest of, his active life. So, I mean, I can spend all night here telling you stories. Most of that actually is funny because he has a great sense of humor. And Kofi also has a great sense of humor. And the dynamics between all this group is wonderful. But I don't think that's the subject of our...
No, we are happy to hear some of the stories. Yeah.
So I think we have our friends here also need to speak. Yeah.
Okay.
I cannot take all the time.
Any reflections on Dr. Salim?
So you'll expect me to reflect as a student and a scholar, maybe as an academic. As you know, if you think of the span of Dr. Salim's headship of the Organization of African Unity, he came into that post when just as the Cold War was ending, right? And think about the state of Africa, not least the state of the world at that point in time. In December 1989, Liberia went into a civil war. Very shortly after that, Sierra Leone and so on. So everything that he was trying to do, you have to see it from the lens of taking over the African Organization of African Unity with all of those grand principles, right? And then suddenly the continent begins to unravel. I was completing my master's at that time. Then I started my PhD, and my PhD I was looking at Liberia, the response to Liberia, both by ECOWAS and the United Nations, that interaction in Liberia. And there was the OAU having to grapple with questions of non-interference. And I want to link that to Dr. Salim's own. I would be very keen to see the archives, because I read some materials, whether in the media or speeches at that point in time. So a continental body that fought for certain principles, one of which was non-interference in the internal affairs of member states, now was fighting for the idea of intervening in member states. So you can imagine how that might have sidelined the AU, and it did for some time. But so when you read Said Djinnit's notes about Dr. Salim, it was about the idea that he was saying, okay, we're not abandoning non-intervention, but non-indifference becomes the principle. So as a student, looking at that historical moment and reading between the lines, what the OAU was saying or not saying was fascinating. But you know how as a student, many of you would know this, you've been reading people, you've been meeting them, you see Ibrahim in the news, you see Dr. Salim in the news, and suddenly you encounter them in person. That's how I would talk about the moment when I myself had matured as a scholar. I served for a short period on the Governance Index Committee, and then saw the man in person and saw the personality we're talking about, and some of those, some of the moments. And typically the Ibrahim Foundation would not just talk about the prize, then they would celebrate. I think Mauritius, a couple of places where some of these celebrations but to see these senior Africans in their element, it's something to truly behold and be able to have side conversations with them about why certain decisions, took place or didn't take place, and to be able to debate with them is something that marks our maturity as African students in Europe, who then will have an opportunity to study, go on field research, and then engage in person the very superstars you've been reading about. And I think that all through his career, those three terms, he was grappling with the issues of real change on the African continent. And had he not done some of the stuff that he did, we would not have seen the moment of the African Union. And those students who have been reading about him may not understand that some of the key principles that became part of the constitutive act of the African Union were because he started shaping them in bite sizes over those 12 years. And I really want to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I follow up on that one? As you said, the period was a time of seismic change globally, but also in Africa, it was the most violent and unstable decade in 1990s. The 1980s was a lost decade in terms of development. And 1990s, which was the height of the structural adjustment program, as you have said, there had been devastating civil war in Liberia, Somalia, Sudan, Burundi, DRC, goes on and on. The Rwandan genocide happened in April 1994. Perhaps the only bit of positive development we had was the end of the minority rule in South Africa. How did he grapple with that? I'm looking back now in hindsight.
So my theory is this, and I haven't interviewed him on this issue. I haven't seen the archives, but I think Dr. Salim was grappling with the recalcitrant African leaders who didn't really like the wind of change and we're not about to change easily. Why do I say that? Look at the mechanism. 1993 was when the question of the mechanism of conflict prevention and resolution. Recall he first put peacekeeping in it. It was rejected, right? And in the end, because of the need for capacity building, in a sense, because in 1982, OAU peacekeeping in Chad was about the only real experience that the OAU had had in that way. And in a Cold War context, it couldn't really, the organization couldn't make peacekeeping progress. Then a continent is awash with all that conflict. And then its Secretary General, the organization Secretary General, proposes a mechanism which really could open the door to the idea that you will resolve that conflict. And they rejected peacekeeping and removed peacekeeping from it because they said that's the job of the United Nations, right? So I can only put myself in his shoes a little bit. I can't even, and see that he must have been dealing with some canker even at that point in time. This is the reason why it took the Economic Community of West African States to go into Liberia, because the OAU itself was rendered paralyzed by the fact that they stuck heavily to the idea of non-intervention, even when it was obvious that that principle had become so archaic. So I want to suggest that he was grappling with member states so much at the point in time.
Maryam, do you have, you have as a daughter a unique perspective on this. So how was it like in 1990s for him being the General Secretary of the OAU?
I say both exciting but frustrating. I think, I won't use the exact word sometimes, you want to knock heads together, as you said, in terms of on the conflict prevention. But there is actually, go find it in the art, there is some discussion in terms of looking at that, and I think some of the interviews. But there were some successes, that he faced. And for me, for every challenge and all the frustration, at the same time, I would say it was that he was dedicated and very committed to the success of the institution, the success and this whole idea that we should be, I think if you look at one of his interviews, he's actually said, we as Africa have to solve our own problems. And I think that's the direction that he was trying to push the organization towards, the OAU towards, then later became the AU. He said we cannot always wait for everyone else to solve our problems. We have to look at ourselves, we have to look internally. And this is the theme, I think the current theme that he had throughout his tenure. And that was what he was trying to achieve. There were some successes, there were some not, and we're still, you're still grappling that as an institution, but also as countries in the continent, right? So I think that is what I heard, and those are the things that we would discuss, when you listen to him and the stories he would tell. But this, and that was, I think that was something that he felt, I think, throughout his, look at his tenure and his leadership or his role as both as, as a member of the OU, the Secretary General of the OU, but his whole career, he always fought for the continent, whether as an ambassador, whether before as a journalist telling the story, or, different areas, or when he would go as a representative in meetings across at the United Nations throughout his career. But then ultimately he says that we need to be fighting and doing for ourselves and not expecting others to solve our problems. So I think that was the key message for me during the 90s when he was there.
So do you have anything to add on this sermon or on 1990s? How was it like for you? And yeah.
Busy building we're busy building infrastructure in Africa. The foundation was not born yet. And I was taken by the beauty and richness of Africa. When we started to work, we built about 15 countries actually. And the question in our mind was, this continent is very rich. Why Africans are poor? And that started a big discussion. involved coffee, involved Mandela, involved because we had a lot of discussion about what the way forward, what is the problem. And then we agreed, all of us at the end, that is the issue of governance. That's the issue. And unless we sort out the governance in Africa, there's no hope. It's not a question of aid, it's not a question of this. Or we have to change ourselves. And the change has to come from us. So we need to do that, and it's tough. Because although we're in business at the time, we decided then on the foundation how it will be. That's why the day we finished our business and we sold the company, we started the foundation, because it's very clear what we're going to do and we what we need to move forward. In the 19th, things started to improve in Africa. And why? In my personal view, the Cold War era was probably one of the worst periods for Africa. Okay? I think colonialism actually was a little bit nicer than the Cold War for us. Why? During the Cold War, we had two camps. And one was chessboard. People trying to get all the strategic squares in that board. And at that, they needed bases, they needed votes in UN, they needed this competition. It doesn't matter what kind of client countries, they call them client countries, what kind of clients you have. They can be criminals, they can be killers, they can be anything. But, in the world, the famous story about the DRC, he's a bastard, but he's our bastard. So this he's my bastard and he's bastard. It doesn't matter. And that was the worst period in Africa. And this is the time when military coups everywhere were crazy. We had some very crazy guys. You again, you are young, but check the guy called Bokassa. Declared himself an emperor and went to crown himself, like Napoleon. And he got the people to design his, you'll not believe it. In the heat of his country, who is wearing all this velvet, with a huge thing behind him, with a huge thing over his head, and sweating like hell. And then you have the kids. And he was so proud, you say, my opponents, I cook them and eat them. He was a cannibal. Yeah. But the Prime Minister of France is there, it is, he's our bastard. It doesn't matter, human rights, theft, whatever. As long as you're a bastard, you're fine. And that was the worst time for Africa. And there's no coincidence that you can pinpoint when things start to change, and that was the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Things start to change after that. No more competition. Then the guys start to say, okay, what about then human rights? What about democracy? And then we had the huge number of constitutions in Africa has been changed suddenly. And first time we hear about the two-term limit. Did anybody hear about two-term limit before 1989? It was not there. Suddenly came the two-term limits and democracy and civil society. Civil what? Civil society. Things changed. And so 90 and the notice, the 2000 to 2010 was, in my view, a very good period for Africa. And we saw governance improving. We saw democracy. We saw civil society being active. We saw But unfortunately, according to our data, in the last 10 years, seems really going down. But anyway, that's my impression about the 90s.
Yeah, I think that brings us to the contemporary. Well, Africa now stands at a critical juncture, facing multiple challenges. Climate change disproportionately affecting the continent, declining effectiveness of multilateral institutions, rising debt level. The number of people living in extreme poverty has risen, actually, despite the decrease in the rate. So, given that the upcoming AU election, the commissioner for the AU Commission will be critical. So, just to give context to the audience, we have 3 contenders. Mr. Raila Odinga, the prominent Kenyan politician, former prime minister, and a key opposition figure, who has run for presidency 5 times. And Mr. Mohammed Ali Yusuf, the long-serving foreign minister of Djibouti, and Mr. Richard Randri Amandroto of the former foreign minister of Madagascar. So, drawing on your experience of Dr. Salim's leadership, what qualities should the new chairperson bring? And should we be optimistic, hopeful that any of them would be able to tackle the multiple kind of challenges the continent is facing? Maybe I can start with it.
Thank you. I have to say, look, I'm not naturally a pessimistic person. There's no evidence I've seen so far about the fact that something would transform in the African Union. Let's hope at least maybe there's a little bit of incremental change. You were saying, drawing on our experience of Dr. Salim, even if all those conflicts in the 1990s happened the way they did, Dr. Salim, you can connect him to the notion of non-indifference, yeah? You can connect him to the mechanism, right, on conflict prevention and peace building, but actually even the peacekeeping became something that people actively had to engage, right? You can also connect him. There's something we shouldn't lose sight of. 2 more things we shouldn't lose sight of. One has to do with this conference on security, stability, and development in Africa. They would call it how many calabashes, CSS, DCA. I think it is. The scholars in this room studying that will recall that is what brought civil society to the core of the OAU, and it's what laid the basis for ECOSOC in the African Union. The final thing is that still under his watch, the whole notion of the unconstitutional, no longer shall we tolerate unconstitutional change in government, right? That protocol was still under his watch. And these are the things that made the new African Union. And I totally agree that the period of the new African Union, in fact, you can start with the period of NEPAD in 2000, then 2002, the Constitutive Act of the African Union, all the way to about 2010. These were the values that underpinned the African Union. But of course, we jettisoned, non-indifference replaced this in the sense that we knew that if a member state was really committing atrocities against its citizens or could not protect those citizens, there was a right of intervention. That's what's buried in Article 4H. And the norms of we will no longer tolerate unconstitutional change in governance, you saw it. So military coup was, to our minds, becoming a thing of the past. We're back to a point where all of that unconstitutional change in governance has started to happen. Of course, when the protests in the Arab Spring in Tunis was happening, people started thinking, is that unconstitutional change in governance? But the thing is, Daniel, we have now seen double standards. Under the watch of the current African Union chair and leader, the leadership, we've seen double standards. So coup happens in one place, it is okay in Chad, but it's not okay in some parts of West Africa. It's become really a reversal of the norms on the continent. A new AUC chairperson has to be able to speak to those issues, has to be able to understand even what the Constitutive Act says. It cannot be about grandstanding, from leaders of governments. And I worry that if we don't have a truly change-making mindset amongst people that have, really been used to particular bureaucratic positions that are being used to worshiping heads of states, regardless of what they represent, the very thing that we've just been talking about, that it will just be business as usual. This ought to be the time of Africa to have the collective agency to speak back to the rest of the world. So in a multipolar world, Africa is the only one that is not quite a polar of anything, where everyone is contesting for something or the other in Africa. If a new AU chairperson cannot do that, and they have not spoken to African publics, so I won't really know. There's supposed to be a TV debate. I really am very concerned, I have to say. I really have buried that optimism somewhere at the moment. I'm not seeing it. And if it's there, I'll be surprised. But, no matter how glorious these guys are in their countries, no matter how glorious Raila has been, he's close to 80 now, right? And then, what are we doing on the continent, really? I'm not seeing it, I have to say, but I would love to really chat to them in a room like this. That opportunity hasn't happened.
Sarmo, do you want to add on that? Are you optimistic about the future of the AU in terms of leading Africa in tackling the multifaceted problems we're facing?
Right. You want to say what Dr. Salim would have said, or what I have said?
I suppose.
Dr. Salim would have said exactly what I've said, but he would have said it in a very diplomatic way. Salim was a diplomat to the tips of his fingers. Very polite, very. I don't have that filter. I'm not trained as a diplomat. Okay, so I think, allow me with full respect, the question is irrelevant because it's not about the person who can become Secretary General of the what they call chair of the commission of the. Is it president of the commission or chair? What's the title? Chairperson. Yes, we're very careful with titles. Yes, because he has no power. And actually, the problem with the African Union is structural. It's not about personalities. It is structural. Because we all jump up and down and talk about sovereignty, African sovereignty, African solutions for, yes, we all shout about that. Look at our organization. Our operational budget is 90% funded by the EU. Do you know that? Do you know that? Do you bother about that? What sovereignty you guys talking about? Yeah, your operational budget, which is the biggest budget, is 90% funded by the European Union. Our leaders refuse to fund their own union. What kind of union is that? Yeah. And then I attended summits, Africa-Europe summits. And we were asking our foundation to educate some areas there anyway. And I was taken back because the European Union was making commitment. We counted 9 commitments were made or something like that. The African Union did not make a single commitment. This is not a meeting between equals. The difference is European countries ceded sovereignties to the Union. Yes? No European country which is a member of the Union can have any trade deal with anybody. Yes? Many areas, regulation, health, medicine, agriculture. Nobody. This is why the crazy British left. Yeah. Because anyway, that's another question. But the countries agreed to pool sovereignty, and they said we're going to be stronger by pooling our sovereignty. We can negotiate better deals. We can become a bigger voice, etc., etc. It's true. GDP in any country in Europe increased by 2-3% as a result of the common market. You come to Africa, not a single element of sovereignty has been ceded to Addis. Nothing. We cannot make a decision on trade. We cannot make a decision about anything. Anything. So what kind of union? Are you guys serious? You don't fund it. It has no power. It has nothing. Then we campaigned for 20 years in our foundation. Where is our seat in the G20? Where our seats, the permanent seats in the Security Council? Where our directors in the board of your World Bank? Yes. Where at last they gave us a seat with the G20. We became G20. Okay. All these arguments and fight, nobody sat to think, how gonna use that seat? Who gonna represent us? They ended up sent the what do you call it? We have an annual president selected. They call him, I don't know what they call it, chairman or yeah. You know how that system, each region have a turn, and then one guy will come, who's the president of his own country, will be like honorary president of the union. So they sent him to New Delhi for the first G20. And I wrote the number of presidents, and I had a long discussion with them. I said, guys, are you serious? Now, to start with, the president of our union has only 1 year term. Only 1 year term. And mind you, he is the president of his own country. So it's not a full-time job. You know, there's something to dabble in when there is a meeting or somewhere. People go to G20, they have prepared, they have Chairperson, they have up-team meetings to create a position, to go there. What our president is going to go say? So after Delhi, I happened to meet the president from Comor. We're in New York, and it was dinner, and I said, oh, congratulations. They just, at last. Yeah. How was it? Oh, great, wonderful, blah, blah. What did you tell those other 20 guys? No, I did not speak. Why? Because I'm new. I need to understand what is. So it is my first meeting. I said, Mr. President, do you realize it's also your last meeting? True. And before that, we wrote to all the African presidents and said, guys, we have been fighting this for 20 years. Get your act together. How could you do it as this? Look, European Union, they have somebody. Now Charles Michel, tomorrow is Santos. Well, what's his name? I forget the Portuguese gentleman, Prime Minister. That's his job. He has an office, he has a team, he has an experts, and his job is Europe. It's not, oh, hello, oh, there is a meeting somewhere, okay, I get a plane and go. I mean, what is this? To go and do what and say what? We said, look, you have to create a similar position, staff with experts, with economists, with people to understand what's position on climate, what's your position in industrialization, what position in AI, what's your position in this, what position in trade, what you have to create all these positions for the Africa to go. That's one thing. Second thing, there is a conflict. There is a conflict, ladies and gentlemen, because if I'm the person, I have been elected in my country by the people to be a president in my country. My job is to fight for my country, right? Now, while I'm still there, I have also to go and represent Africa. When I go and sit at the table, am I thinking Africa or am I thinking my country? Because the interests of my country may be different from the general interests of Africa. Yeah? If I am Cyril Ramaphosa and you happen to be president 2 or 3 years ago, yes, we talk about climate. South Africa has a different profile. Yeah? South Africa put huge amount of carbon out there. It's as much as any industrialized country because of coal. Their position of transition is completely different. The rest of Africa does nothing. So African position is different. In Africa, most of African countries, we want a carbon tax based on the amount of emission you do. That's the only way to solve it. Global carbon tax. South Africa position, of course, oh my God, you're gonna have to pay half their budget on a carbon tax. Of course, again, is that. So if you are Ramaphosa and sitting at that table at G20, what you gonna say? You have a conflict. So you cannot be at the same time president of your own country, serving your own people because you swore on the constitution to serve them, and then go and represent Africa at the same time because maybe positions are different. So it doesn't work. We need a proper. Now then we're fighting for seats in UN Security Council. Who's going to represent us? In what way? In what way the representatives there are going to really express the will of Africa? Yeah? If I'm Moroccan, I have a different position from an Algerian. So we have not thought about how to use these seats and this power and these things given to us, and it is very sad. Structurally, we need to change the union drastically. We start by funding it ourselves. Because if you fund it, then you believe in it. Yeah. At the moment, it's a club of presidents. They meet once or twice a year, hug each other, blah, 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 and that's it. But it's a club. It is not really what we hope for. I say that because I love the African Union and I want a real African Union working for Africa, really bringing us together. At the moment, we don't have that.
Can I say that I don't disagree with that at all? I mean, fundamentally, there's that structural issue. But in a sense, we can also say that the United Nations and the way member states behave really does not give many options to the Secretary General of the United Nations. The difference between, even you can compare the current Secretary General of the United Nations and that of the African Union, right? The voice of the SG, to use that, the agency of that office to speak out on particular issues. As we've heard him on Israel, Gaza, on a few things, we don't even hear from our own Secretary Generals. And actually, there are times, as Samo, that they can go, the Charter of the African Union, the Act of the African Union empowers our African Union Secretary General or chairperson to say, I'm not going to observe an election because I've written to you, this has happened here, we have seen this. Côte d'Ivoire is an example at the time, right? All the processes are flawed. You can see it, but you still send observers to the place. And you see that over and over again where they don't even use their voice so that you can say to the leaders that you appointed me here. At least this is what our recommendation will be. Let it be on record that we recommended to you, you didn't take it. That's a big challenge. But structurally, I cannot really disagree with anything you've said. The biggest issue, an integrative approach is how the Europeans, come to us. And you're right, they come with an agenda, it's negotiated, with Africa, but then the next thing you see, bilateral engagement. Different member states are doing what they please. This is the canker. I would expect a new AU Commission chairperson to really say these are the things that are wrong with the union at the moment, exactly the sort of things you're saying. And these are my proposals. That is my vision for how we can correct it.
But the challenge is how to get the African leaders to be really serious. That's the challenge for us. And they need to understand. I give you an example. In my country, Sudan, the ICC condemned Omar Bashir for the genocide in Darfur. Okay? They go to Addis, and then they look at each other. Oh, the ICC can hold us responsible, can issue warrant for any one of us. I mean, we are a club. You understand? It's a mentality of a club. We are 54 privileged members of that club. And how dare somebody suddenly were exposed? So they say, no, we will not. We had long argument with those people. They say, oh, this ICC only goes after Africans. And we said, actually, it's going after Africans because many African countries haven't got the capacity to prosecute. When you cannot prosecute, you cannot offer justice to victims, then the guys come and try to who gonna give justice to those victims? And then they said, okay, we're gonna create, and at that time, when we say it's not African, we had the largest number of judges in that court. Yeah? And Fatou Bensouda was here. So this is an African court, guys. What you say, there's a colonial. Then they said, oh, we're gonna create our own court. Do you know how much money it costs? Where is your budget? You don't have a budget. You're gonna go to ask the European Union to give you money to do the court? They say, okay, I've made this court, ICC, why do you go there? And then started to create the court, and then we read the stuff. And this court cannot try presidents or ministers. So I asked them, I said, excuse me, if you want to prosecute taxi drivers or fishermen, you have a lot of courts there. That's not the job of the ICC. You see, because we are an elite club. Nobody touches us. Okay? And this is unfortunate. That's why we really need to challenge that and withstand that. So that's why I'm saying that's what Salim believes. He would say it in a different way.
But not behind closed doors. Yeah, he would say politely, publicly, not so much behind closed doors. No, I'm not going to talk forward, as you know, we already agree, but I will say, but it comes back to what I said in my remarks. You know, we need leadership that thought beyond the individual. I'm in power, and I'm going to see what I can do. Whereas if you had, and I think, okay, I'm not saying about just all the good old days, but if you really look at the leadership, statesmen, we had statesmen. In terms of thinking ahead and how we work together, whether it was during the colonization or other initiatives, where we'd come together and work together for a common goal. You don't see that. So, you see it in pockets, but that's something we need to think, and that's what's going to take us. I mean, there's so many challenges now. The challenge is not going to be done in isolation. Yeah. So whether it's climate, whether it's other challenges, we have a continent with so many resources. We talk about it all the time in ad infinitum, whether it's, natural resources and everything else. We have a young population that's really smart and innovative.
I have two questions to Sarmo and Professor Funmi before I open to the audience. When I read the Mo Ibrahim Foundation's 2023 report, Global Africa, Africa in the world and the world in Africa, it provides a damning assessment of Africa's underrepresentation in the global institutions, whether it's the UN, international financial institutions. Africa is excluded from key decision makers and so on. But despite the challenges, your introduction, what you have wrote there, conveys a sense of optimism. I'm just wonder what inspires your confidence in Africa's ability to address and overcome its challenges. You talk about a little bit about the youth population, economic potential, and so on. But the sort of things you have been telling us now doesn't strike me as optimistic outlook of Africa's.
No, because unless look, in order to make progress, we need to diagnose what's our problems. Without diagnosing the problems, how can you move forward? So this is extremely helpful. That's why I say I'm a greatest supporter of the EU. I mean, Moussa Faki is a great, I mean, boy, it's wonderful what you guys doing because he knows we are helping him to try to move this thing forward. And so I believe in that. We did work with President Ruto to have that conference on climate, because we argued that COP has no, there's no voice for Africa in COP. Nobody listened to Africa. And they came to Glasgow and said they were not invest in any projects for power in Africa, which may be, gas or stuff like that. We stopped investing. 39 institutions, banks, stop funding it. And of course, I got mad because Germany built they closed the nuclear, reactors and built 3 major coal-fired power generations. And it's fine. What about Africa trying to use its own gas for its own people? Why? Because German government doesn't need the banks to fund him, but the African countries need to. So those guys become, wonderful lily whites when it comes to Africa, But in their country, they're going to make all this mess and they can continue sending the carbon out. But Africa has no voice. So the guys do all this crap and nobody is challenging them. So we said, no. The problem, because we are 54 countries, we'll go to these conferences and we have 54 voices. Most of these voices uninformed, actually, ill-informed. We say, look, we need to have 54 means noise. Noise. You don't hear anything. But we need one voice. What are the issues? And so that's why first time Africa went to Dubai in the last COP with a clear agenda. Everybody reading from her machine because he managed to get everybody there on board and going. And this was an initiative of a president. Yeah, Moussa Faki was there, but he was invited. It's not the African Union who did it, unfortunately. So people trying to find ways to do things. But that's what we hope to happen in Africa, to be able to speak in one voice. If 50 countries speak in one voice, it's a very loud, clear voice. But 54 little country, blah, 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 noise. Nobody cares. That's really important. Why I'm optimistic? I'm optimistic because the African young generation is different from our generation. Okay? They are much more bold, much more bold. They have no respect for the elders. It hurts, but it's good. It's good because the elders made a mess of Africa. And those guys have no respect for that. And that is something really good. And those guys are very well informed. When I grew up in Sudan, I mean, we had only 2 papers or, from the government or you have a ministry, in every African country, there's a ministry called Ministry of Information. Because the government believe this should be the only source of information. They have a ministry called Ministry of Information to inform you about anything going on. That's it. That's excuse me. Those kids now, they have the whole world. I mean, internet and mobile phones, etc. Do you know what's happening everywhere? Nobody dictate what they see. Nobody censor what they read. And their knowledge of what's going on far exceed our knowledge. So this generation is going to change things because that will not be acceptable, what is happening now. So that's why I'm optimistic.
Thank you very much. One question for Professor Funmi. So one often overlooked constituency in discussions about Africa is the African diaspora, a group as diverse as the continent itself. So if I'm correct, you were born in Britain and raised in Nigeria. This offers you a unique perspective. Interestingly, another individual with similar background, born in Britain and raised in Nigeria, is Kemi Badenoch. So the leader of the Conservative Party. Yet it's clear that your views differ significantly. So, what are your thoughts on the African diaspora, its diversity, its role and influence in shaping narratives and policies about Africa? Sir Mo is also an African diaspora, British and also African, so you can also add up there.
Daniel, why are you putting me on the spot in this way? No, I mean, really, the African diaspora is really, I think in so many ways, it's a diverse group of people. You're going to find them in multiple places. They are both makers and breakers in different ways. But I actually think that the real proof, because we can't talk about the African diaspora without really looking and engaging with the way in which they contribute to the continent, right? Some have come to stay. They don't necessarily crisscross like Samo and others do. Some of us, go back and forth. If you are committed, if you are a diaspora that is engaging in Africa, you have to be committed to the African agenda. You cannot be contributing negatively to the place. You have to be a convener of African agency. And I think the privilege we have is that we're able to engage with the whole continent, with different representatives of the whole continent in a room like this. We're able to galvanize, work with young people, work across different boundaries to hopefully convene a common voice for Africa. My own contribution really is in the area of education. The one thing that I hope I can contribute even a drop of my existence to is this idea of the vibrancy of African youth. But of those African youth, there are 900 million of them under the age of 35, right? Only 10, so half of them, or about 460 roughly, are between 17 to 35, with only 10% enrollment in any kind of higher education. This is a challenge, but still you find that positivity in creative economies. You find it in the ways in which all sorts of talents are bubbling. And this is in spite of their leaders in government. So I think there's a lot to be done. I can't comment beyond on Kemi Badenoch beyond the fact that certain Africans have come to stay, right? And they're also a reflection of the kinds of privileges and class differences in Africa. That's all I can say. We all represent different dynamics, okay? And we have a right to be. Thank you.
Do you have anything to add, Sir Mo? You are yourself diasporan.
I think maybe we should open the question to, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
Yeah.
Any questions? Here, 2, 3.
We also have 2 online.
2 men?
2 online.
2 online, okay. So let's take 3 and then
You want
one by one.
Maybe 3.
Yeah, 3.
I had a question that had to do with kind of the the AU that we have now and the African commitment, which I think during colonialism and the most, I suppose, historically recent difficult times of our existence and our liberation, the African diaspora not the new diaspora of like Africans coming to Europe, but the African, the Caribbean countries, that involvement in the liberation of Africa has been insurmountable. Where I think that our current connection, our current commitment, really to Africans of all creeds and Africans of all types is sort of lagging behind, or we've gone. We leapt forward and went back. And I think this question of I think the AU has called it the sixth region, but it seems there's really nothing happening about the diaspora, the African diaspora that is the Caribbean and other regions like Latin America and other places where Africans have been taken to unwillingly, but have also returned to contribute very massively to our own liberation struggles continentally. That's the kind of question that I know that nobody's a representative of the AU there, but that's the question that I think that constantly bothers us. I think in the department, in our discussions of Black studies and Africanness and Blackness, what does that mean continentally and globally? Thank you.
Shall I take two more questions?
Yeah, thank you for putting on this event. Often when I come to these kind of events, I'm actually wondering, is it worth coming? Am I going to be disappointed? Am I going to hear the honest truth? There's so much that you've said I actually disagree with. You know, the structural issues are there, okay? But when you say, for instance, oh, the main problems we've had over the Cold War period or over the 90s or the 80s is that we haven't changed. What about them? We're living in a world system that has a structure that creates systematic poverty, systematic hardship throughout the world that they benefit from. So when I see my brothers and sisters come from the continent and come here and reverse the whole discussion around us and our inability to do X, Y, and Z, I'm like, where are we going with that? Is it because we have BBC World Service here, or we have people from different art, media, that we feel that we can't talk the truth when they are around?
Can you ask the question, please? Where I talk?
I'll ask a question. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You have asked a question. It's okay.
That is a question, okay. But okay, just to placate where we're going. The BRICS organization countries have recently sorted out their own SWIFT agreement. Yes, financial agreement, which will soon come into play. Do the people on the panel see that as a positive step, or do you see it as something that you would not try to emulate? Because for me, this whole thing really is around the economics, not the politics, it's the economics.
Thank you. Here, the lady here.
Thank you very much, panel. I wonder, as you said, reflecting over how Dr. Salim brought in the peace keeping, peace building, conflict resolution angle more of, and thinking of today, as we look forward to February, I wonder if we can just look at one of the urgent matters right now, which you've delved into slightly, which is Sudan. And it must, I would imagine it could be on the immediate agenda for whoever's coming into the AU. And so considering now that we're seeing member states veto ceasefire decisions in the Security Council, we're even seeing that the escalation of violence. Already AU has suspended Sudan's membership, and there was, during the mediation process, consideration from those in Sudan that potentially using their membership even as a leverage for future negotiations. What do you see as an opportunity for whoever comes in on February to really, should be one of the immediate actions to see in the next 6 months to try to de-escalate what we're seeing in Sudan? Thank you.
Thank you. So,
Thank you. I think really interesting questions, and I think some of them are interlinked. I will conclude with the question of the global diaspora. But let me take the brother's point there. I think part of the challenge that we have is that it is, and this is a problem with critical studies and problem solving, right? Because criticality causes us to always diagnose a problem all the time, that there is a structural inequity globally. Where I agree with you is that it's economic. It has always been, right? Whether you're taking it historically from slave trade to colonialism and so on, there's economics underneath it. But the levels of empowerment have not stayed the same. And so my scholarship is no longer, I think it's acknowledged. If you read my work, I put that structural imbalance there. What I don't want Africans to go away, to run away from, is the idea that we're not without power over our natural resources, over our people, over our governance. But yet we have an elite system that really causes that dissonance, between institutions and people. And we need to really query that elite system. It is not France or the UK that is responsible for the decisions that my leaders make in Africa to decide whether to impoverish their people or not. And we have to call that out. So you're right about the structural imbalance, but I'm no longer willing to only blame one side without blaming the other. There's a connivance between sets of African elite and the leaders of European and global North economies. And that's what we need to call out, right?
Just directly for our friend who disagree with me, of course, your democratic right to disagree with me. But we should not be in denial. One thing I really don't like is that whatever mess we end up having, we always look out and say, oh, somebody did that, it's CIA. Some years ago, CIA who did this. Oh, no, this guy did that. This guy, no, we are perfect. We are wonderful people. I mean, look, unless we are able to look at ourselves and criticize ourselves, we have no right to criticize anybody else. That's something. As for our opinion and the global structure, financial or governance structure or multilaterals, you watch my video, my interview with Ajay Banga. Okay? You find it in YouTube or on our website, and you will hear our view about that. I just published a huge, well, actually last year, article in Foreign Trades about Africa. Just because I wanted the Americans to understand what is this issue with Africa. About 11 pages or 12 pages. I assume you are a member of this. You guys have Foreign Affairs magazine in your library. Go and read that. Then you know that in America and Europe, in whatever, we attack those people. We fought against Schultz over the issue of the stupid decision to stop funding power in Africa. Our attack on the World Bank is you guys decided that you're going to do 300 million people. Yes? When we read the issue of the 600 million people. But the subject today was about the African Union. So that's what we're talking about. If we talk about the African Union, I have to talk about the African Union. I don't talk about the relationship between this guy and that guy. Yeah. And we are not perfect. And if you want to improve, you need to know where you are weak. Otherwise, you don't improve. That's the whole issue. But to see our view of the whole thing, this is the foundation, website, read our stuff, and you'll see how we deal with all other issues. And still, you can differ with me, but read it first.
There's a question about Sudan in the diaspora, if you want to address the Sudan one.
Yeah, Sudan, I mean, again, we are the engineers and the designers of our own misery in Sudan. And sometimes I get really quite annoyed when I see social media, some people say, oh, it is imperialism. It is, what imperialism, guys? It is our problem in Sudan. It's our failure as Sudanese people in civil society to work together and together. Those young people created an incredible revolution, unarmed, peaceful, toppled a regime. And then we failed as civilians to really work together and without, and that was the history of Sudan, actually. And that was the reason we had coup after coup. In our independence, in like 70 years, 55, 56 years, we ruled by soldiers. Is that natural? It's not natural. But I cannot blame the imperialism or Saudi Arabia or Emirates or Egypt. It is our fault. We should not have allowed that, what happened in Sudan, to happen. Today, we have the largest crisis in the world. More people marginalized, more refugees, internally displaced people than Ukraine and Gaza put together. And nobody paying attention, unfortunately. It seems the life of colored people is different from the life of white guys. I don't know.
Can I read?
I think the diaspora question, and by the way, really the disappointment with the African Union on the Sudan issue is precisely because the African Union of the 2000s had precisely the peace and security architecture that could respond to Sudan, right? Not anymore. The Gulf countries, many other actors are present in Sudan, not the African Union in the way that it ought to. The diaspora question, the immediate answer I can give you is that actually there's a strong global Pan-African narrative which is represented in the idea of the global majority people. And when you look at the narrative, when you look at the writings around this, it's very strong. It used to be represented in the idea of an African Union, and that's why the sixth estate or the sixth region was the diaspora. Because of the norms that were inbuilt, those norms have not been met by the relevant kinds of actions. And before then, the idea of solidarity of African states, African peoples, was embedded in the Organization of African Unity. And that is something we cannot really find properly at the moment. So something is broken there, and it needs to be returned to if we're to have that kind of collective agenda.
Let me quickly read it online. We have about 100 people online, actually, and so many questions. So I'll just select some, maybe. Yes. So Kabinga from Kenya, I believe, is asking, what role do you see the regional bodies like ECOWAS, EAC, SADC play in a reverberated sovereign African Union with donated sovereignty? And then second, should we move towards a proportionally elected African Union parliament? One. The second one is, I'm sorry about this, Samo. How can Africa's philanthropists better support and invest in Africa's development? We want your money. And for Maryam, somebody's asking about Salim Ahmed Salim's link to India. Those three to begin with.
Don't you start with regional economic communities?
So in the African peace and security architecture, the regional economic communities are actually the bedrock of that architecture. And if one fails, the other will invariably fail. And in a sense, almost every single one of them is struggling at the moment. ECOWAS led the way a couple of decades ago. You can see how it's struggling with the question of the breakaway Sahelian states at the moment. But I like the point about the parliament, because without an elected group of people that represent the continent, we will keep having the same sort of conversation. Should the African Parliament have a say in this question of what becomes of, how we appoint the leaders at the African Union Commission? Yes, it should, but none of those things are there. I think they're possible, solutions. It's too late for this round, but for the next round, we should begin to see the kinds of solution that can get us to the next level. At the moment, that sense of shared and common purpose is what is missing.
Would you like to reflect on the? Yeah, it doesn't.
I don't think it's a matter about methodology of election, which is the issue. I think the issue is what is the power vested in the AU. If African countries are unwilling to cede sovereignty in certain area to the Union, then the Union is powerless. So what the Union can do? It becomes like, a marketing office or, a public relation office. But it's not a union. What do you mean by union? In what way it is a union? I mean, it's a nice title, but it is not a union, guys.
Yeah.
So that is the issue. Do you want to have a union? Then have a union.
Okay, there's another question on we can refine it on African philanthropists. So what are your views on what specifically is the question about?
It was, I think the role of, God, there's so many questions.
You can broadly reflect on philanthropy in Africa.
Yeah, because I pressed it and it's gone now.
Well, the issue is philanthropy is very much tied to the philanthropist himself or herself. And some people like to give malaria nets, some people like to give baby milk, some people, it's wonderful. Anybody able to give something. And but look, if you have a cancer, aspirin doesn't work. Okay, so who gonna give these kids milk next year? Why do they need milk from somebody? Why? I think that's why. If you consider me philanthropist, I don't know if I'm a philanthropist or not, but I'm an activist, maybe more than a philanthropist. But we need to change the root causes of poverty in Africa, because we can, and it's possible. And that is the route to end the need. I dream of the day that African countries become donors. Okay? Because, look, Africa as a continent, you can get India, China, Europe, US, and put it inside and you have more space. So Africa is underpopulated. Our population is less than India or China. But we have lands more than those guys. And we have fertile land, we have natural resources, what have we done with it? Why are we poor? That's the question we need to ask. So I thank the philanthropists. That's nice. And but at the end it is aspirin.
Thank you.
Maryam, if you want to tackle the question.
I think it was the link between Salim Ahmed Salim and India.
Link. There are many links. So after Egypt, they were in India, my parents. So that was his second position, ambassadorship. He was in New Delhi. Well, the other link, my brother Ali was actually born in New Delhi. But in all seriousness, I mean, his time there when I used to listen to him in his stories, but also in some of his memoirs in terms of the time there and what he learned. He talks about when he first met Indira Gandhi, before she became prime minister, and the lessons he got from her, because he says, I was a brash young ambassador, went and complained, I think she was Minister of Information at the time, about what the news would say about Africa and the relationship and all these things. And she said, Salim, do you know how many times they talk about me in the media? You just have to ignore and just keep doing the work. So one of the things he learned there. But for me, I think one of the things he said was just going to a country with one of the biggest democracies, and the lessons that we can take from that in terms of, and the relationship we had, a lot of the things, and he traveled all through. And one of the other things that he learned when he was in India, the important thing that he actually, I think then also instilled in us, is to getting to know the country is to travel the country and to get to know the people and the culture. And he learned so many things in his time in India that and then he kept, going back on many occasions for different conferences or different meetings and on the political. But the what he learned in terms of how the system of government and the lessons he could draw from there. But it's a very long history. And as I said, that was his second diplomatic posting.
Yeah, thank you. There's also the whole triple heritage.
I tell you a funny story actually about India. I hope you don't mind. Actually, it reveals the humility and humanity of the man. He was a kid really, a young revolutionary and troublemaker. And he went to Cairo as an ambassador at a very young age, very young. And then he went to India, very young. And he said, I was ambassador there, and they have all these parties, the embassies, the national days, and stuff like that. And he said one day he was one of these parties, and big reception. And he said one ambassador came to him, and he said, Salim, why I see always at this party? Because all these are black tie dudes. Why don't you wear a black tie? He said, oh, I'm wearing a black tie. You're wearing a necktie, which is black. I said, it's a necktie, what's a black tie? So that is the kind of a man who laughs at himself. And he said, I always wear a black tie. So what's your problem? He said, no, black tie is like this. It's not like this.
It's not the tie, it's the dress code.
Shall we do one round of? Rebecca.
We could probably do 3 more questions and then the reception is
3 more
ready.
questions.
Yeah.
One here, Yosef, and there back, and Mr. Noor is there.
Maybe 4 then.
Or maybe we can have, yeah.
But not like a commentary, please.
Brief questions.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to all the panelists for your fantastic insights. I have a question for Ms. Salim, actually. So how do you feel? So obviously the digital archive is an absolutely fantastic asset. How do you feel organizations like the African Union can truly leverage it to actually create change and make a difference in the true sense of the word, given the current state of affairs in Africa at the moment? It would just be interesting to hear your insights on that. Thanks.
Here, Yosef, down here. Yeah.
Thank you. We've been reminded by His Excellency the Ambassador that Dr. Salim was the recipient of the highest honor of the Chinese government, and the African Union is housed in a building in Addis Ababa that was like a gift from the Chinese government. And we all know, and a lot has been written, that there is a lot of Chinese investment in Africa and Chinese expertise and technologies. What would be, as someone who was very familiar with China from early on, what would be the fears in the hopes of Dr. Salim Ahmed regarding Africa's partnership with China?
Over there. Okay, you have them.
First of all, I'm really grateful that we are able to have this type of forum. Thank you so much to let us be able to have a sort of dialectic. So I have two questions. The first question is about financement of the African Union. So how should we proceed with private entities? How do they collaborate with each other? I believe that there is a lack of cohesion due to the emergence of some monopolies in some African region. How can we make them realize that there is a lack of leadership that can result to fragmentation, and also deal with the lack of transparency? So this is my first question. The second question is about knowledge, and knowledge being power. So there are limited opportunities for young African people, particularly with education. Today, we're really able to have the privilege to have a discussion with you. But what about also the other? Is there a clear pathway for their involvement, especially in the African Union, such as maybe traineeship? And it will be also... do you think that it is essential maybe to break down structural inequalities? So yeah, thank you.
Two hands here and
my name is Tariq Mohammed, and I'm the Director of Projects for PACE Group, Pan-African Conferences and Exhibitions, registered in 2012 in the city, Lombard Street, just next to the Bank of England. The idea is that Africa needs massive investment, and some of our work centered for a long time on foreign direct investment. So we've had an initiative on foreign direct investment for Libya post-revolution. We had one that struggled quite a bit for Sudan, for FDI Sudan, and recently FDI Ethiopia, on the behest of Vodafone, who went in with a massive telecom contract in Ethiopia, the biggest since their contract in Egypt because of the population size. I'm actually really here. I would like to start like everybody else and congratulate Tumulgeta on this amazing work. Really, I've enjoyed my time and it was amazing. And I think you and your team have done really well as members of the African diaspora in terms of your effectiveness in putting this together. There is, of course, a difference between talking, that's what we're doing here, and listening, and taking action. And of course, Mo Ibrahim, somebody who does not come from money and through knowledge becomes a multi-billionaire, that says that you are a doer. And of course, we have also Dr. Arkabe there. I met him in the Sheraton Hotel in Ethiopia, and he's been a doer in Ethiopia. Lots of.
I wonder if you could just ask the question, please.
I'm coming, but I've been patient. Dr. Arkabe put together the Ethiopian industrial strategy, and a lot of the industrial parks in Addis, a lot of it is actually down to his work he was doing, not just the talking. But the mixed feeling really, and in a way I'm glad you've, bulldozed the way for me. Omar al-Bashir was caught with $20 million and some other bits of money, which he claimed to have got from Mohammed bin Salman. After you establish the good governance prize of your foundation, you've given it out only 7 times since 2007. You've not been really resourceful when it comes to Sudan. You've had a bad reception there. You've not been able to hand Bashir $20 million. Instead of 5, and somehow, avoid the revolution, bloody revolution that we had, and still a counter-revolution is going. And on that, I actually challenge you to, be frank and admit your being inept in a way to bring about change, no matter what you did. Recently in Kenya and with Abdullah Hamdok in Paris. I laughed a lot here today, and you put out a lot of the jokes. But we are suffering. There's a lot of pain. I'll stop here. I wanted to go on, but I just leave it here. And if you could just say, what can you really do with all this financial muscle that you have, having failed in Sudan really to get the NCP to cede power prior to this revolution? What can you do really? How can you be resourceful with your money to actually bring about some change? People are dying in Sudan. Huge numbers, so say 30,000. Actually, this is probably above 100K. Another 2 years, it could be 250 like Algeria. So this misery has to end.
Thank you.
Okay, one last question there behind Mr. Nur. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel, and the team. Maryam, a few years ago, your dad was here speaking in the same hall, and some of us were privileged to listen to him. He lit this hall just the way this panel did. Of course, he spoke in diplomatic terms, but I see a bit of him in all of you, even the straight talking more here. And what he said then was that at the AU, they have all these good policies, whether it's on human rights, economic development, youth empowerment. There was nothing lacking. The problem was the implementation. And he said the implementation, he didn't actually foresee that coming from the leadership then. He said it will come from the below. Maybe this is the optimism that more you are sharing. But my question, I'll pose the question to Maryam. We have two economic communities in East Africa and Horn of Africa, IGAD and the East African Community. And there is overlapping membership. You will find that 4 of IGAD member states are also members of the East African Community. Is it not about time that we merge these two economic communities to make them more efficient? Thank you.
Who wants to have it go first? Yeah.
Right, my Sudanese fellow. I assume you're Sudanese, correct? Yeah. We asked about financially, how can you push Sudan forward? I think before even we talk about that, we need to stop the war. Because you cannot do anything if there is war. Even humanitarian aid are not... we're not able to reach the people. The director of the FBO, the food program, they say that they get 10 lorries with aid. Only 3 reach refugee camp. Along the way, all bandits and all, every, and they cannot find drivers now because they're afraid of the... So even when little aid managed to get into the country, it is lost. So we have to stop the war. That's the first priority. Where to start now? When to rebuild Sudan? That is a huge, huge task. You see the photographs of Khartoum, Omdurman, it's a ghost city. Our infrastructure is destroyed. Even before the war, when we had the democratic government of Hamdok, and we tried very hard in our foundation, with the Americans, with the French, with the Germans, we met all the leaders of all these countries. And the key issue was cancellation of debt, because Sudan had almost 60 billion of debt. When you have 6 billion of debt, nobody wants to give you money. Yeah? We managed to have a lot of conversation with the IMF and the World Bank, but the problem was the American sanctions, because they are not even allowed to be members or to talk to them even. To their credit, they did all what they can, both the head of the IMF and the head of the World Bank. And at the end, we managed, and we get some donation to pay in order to get them back admitted into organizations. And there was $3 billion in the pipeline coming to Sudan from the institutions. There was a conference in Paris, and people agreed to remove, like, I think 25 billion or something, a huge number to cancel. And then it was then we had the military coup. Then all that is gone. All that is gone. What do? You know, those soldiers are just destroying the country. And we go back to square one. The debt cancellation did not happen. The $3 billion coming to Sudan stopped. Nothing coming. There was a lot of goodwill towards Sudan. In every capital we go, we say, wow, this is amazing young people in Sudan. What can we do to help? And then all the goodwill is lost because we failed. We failed to talk to each other. We failed to move forward. And we had all those generals who dream of power and money, because power means money. Yeah. So we are the victims of our own bad deeds, unfortunately. I'll tell you what we do.
No, privately. Thank you.
Why don't you say it publicly so
No.
everybody can go and do it?
We'll have to evacuate the room in a bit.
Yeah. There was a question on the digital archives and what can be used. I think our hope was, and that's why we put it out there, and we're still uploading more documents. Some things we're getting still, the declassification from the government to make sure that we can put them up, because we're literally putting all his notes, handwritten and speeches and everything up there. So it's all there for you to search. So our hope is that you can look, they can use that, or anybody can use that if you're looking at leadership about what worked, what didn't. The problem is whether we want to look at some of the historical misses or mistakes that we've made and learn from it. But if it's there to learn from a lot of the leaders and what they did, how they worked together. I mean, some of those lessons there are very critical for, I think, as a future path. And I think, as my fellow panelists also said here, I think what my hope is in our future in terms of the younger generation, because that's the internet generation. That's the one that looks at and will look online. And that's why we elected to put everything online, in terms of making it easily accessible, so as the future leaders will be there. And then the question on China, you asked about what my dad would say. He had a very long history with China. So it's not just in 72, and in terms of restoration of China into the UN. He was there in 69 as ambassador, as some of you may know, but even earlier, he was there in the early 60s as a journalist. So he has a very long history, and all through his career. And if you asked him in whatever interviews, he was always asked, he said there's a deep and long-lasting relationship with Tanzania, with Africa, and it's a friendship that's there. One could talk about whether it makes sense in terms of loans, but that's also one's own leadership, right? And how effectively and what terms that you negotiate. And so with anybody that you borrow money from. But in terms of the infrastructure development, if you talk about, for example, in Tanzania and in Zambia, the Tazara line, which is now being fixed, that's a long history. And so he was always adamant that, it's a very strong partnership and relationship and friendship for Tanzania and for Africa. That's what my father would say.
Thank you so much. I think we'll have to stop here. If anybody has an extra question, you can please email cas@soas.ac.uk. We'll try to get an answer for you. But we'll have to evacuate the room, and I think people have other engagements as well. But thank you so much for that. This was just absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Professor Funmi. Amazing. Thank you so much. Ibrahim, and thank you so much, Maryam. Can I have the panel come up for a photo, please? Balozi, if you can just come up here just for a photo opportunity that we'll then put social media. Everybody, we have a reception that you're welcome to have a drink and eat something and network. Karibuni. Kadir, enjoy us.